the president has stopped short of directly blaming Iran for the drone attack on the Saudi Arabia oil installations. Some people took that as a sign of, okay, maybe there won't be a military conflict. Yet at the same time, the president is saying things like, we've got ammunition, we are locked and loaded. So where are we headed on this? Dakota Wood is with me. He has served America for 2 decades in the U.S. Marine Corps and is now a senior research fellow for defense programs for the Heritage Foundation. Dakota, thanks for taking the time this morning. Good morning to you.
Hey, Jeff, it's really great to be with you. Thanks.
Dakota, I'll just put it to you directly. Do you think we're going to war alongside Saudi Arabia in the Middle East?
No, I don't think so. A war in like a larger regional kind of sense. The Saudis really have to decide how important it is to them to protect their territorial integrity, their sovereignty, and respond to this attack that all the evidence points toward Iran. The problem for them is, do they actually have the ability to do that? So it's one thing to have frontline equipment. It's another thing to actually use that competently, with the risk that it could spur a larger conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and there would be profound economic consequences for the Saudis. So this is why the president is really putting the onus on them. It's not for the U.S. to unilaterally respond to Iran, since Iran attacked Saudis. The Saudis have to figure this out, and then we decide whether or not we throw in with them if they decide to take action.
So what would you say, Dakota, is the main issue at this point between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Well, they're both vying for dominance within the Islamic world in terms of regional influence, the ability to shape events, a conflict between Shia and Sunni that goes all the way back to the 7th century with the death of Muhammad. So they've been at each other religiously, ideologically, and influence-wise for many, many centuries. It's amplified with modern technology and all, but you've seen Iran push through Iraq, Syria, to the borders of Israel. Saudi Arabia has the Arabian Peninsula, and 90% of the world's Muslims are Sunni. So this is a larger contest between these two states for who is the dominant influence in their world.
And Dakota, your comments make sense to me because I was watching the president meet with the media yesterday, and he kept emphasizing that whatever help that America offered, the Saudis would have to pay for it. Do you think that was his way of warning them that we would not jump all in militarily if they wanted to retaliate against Iran?
Well, any president, whether it's President Trump or anybody else, has 3 or 4 audiences that they are always speaking to in any given sentence. So there's the Saudi-Iranian issue, their European allies, but he's also very aware of the domestic audience, right? What does America think of this thing? So one could interpret this as very transactional. If you want our help, you'll have to pay for it. But it's also signaling that he does not want to get immersed in another Middle East war when his whole presidency has been trying to get out of these things, right? Very hesitant to wade into Syria, wants to pull back from Afghanistan, thought the Iraq war was a mistake, etc. So the last thing he wants to do going into a presidential election cycle is to re-immerse the United States. And so I think there's a lot of nuance in these sorts of comments that he makes where we'll be with you, we're picking sides, essentially, but we're going to go into this flow with our eyes open, and it's not for us to decide up front. It's finding out how the region is going to respond to this, and then we decide how deeply we want to get involved.
Dakota, in reading all of the commentary that I've been trying to read about this attack, one suggestion was that it was strange timing on the attack because there was some thought that President Trump was thinking about easing some of the sanctions on Iran, and that columnist then led to the conclusion that maybe it was someone else trying to make Iran look bad. Do you have any thoughts as far as who might be responsible? Are you open to the possibility that someone else was responsible?
Well, I don't usually write off any possibility. But the conspiracy theories always come up. in this sort of thing.
Right.
I mean, if you wanted to cast a wide net, maybe Israel did this, to foment things. Maybe the Saudis did this to get the U.S. to wade in. They'll always fight to the last drop of American blood. Why would the Iranians do this to themselves if they saw relief of sanctions? They take action. We're going to come back with greater sanctions. So I think we look at the complexity of the attack, the types of weapons that had to have been used. It looks like cruise missiles, and it looks like larger scale, larger category drones. The Houthis, you can write them off. They didn't do this thing. So all the evidence points to Iran. It's the most logical outcome, and I think anything beyond that really starts to strain the bounds of credulity.
And Dakota, as you put it, this would be a regional fight between the Saudis and Iran. But once the United States gets involved, there are then huge implications to that. People start taking up sides, and that's where this can become a much bigger conflict. Am I correct?
You are. I mean, do the Russians throw in some way? Do the Chinese try to use this distraction to make a move in the Indo-Pacific region?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we got really embroiled in a war, do they then move on Taiwan? So there are these much larger geopolitical issues that are always on the periphery. And again, this is another set of factors that a president and his or her advisors have to be, considering before we start pulling triggers.
Dakota, recently John Bolton left the administration, and he is perceived as being very aggressive in the area of foreign policy. Do you find it ironic that he would have left before this? Because it does seem to be that President Trump's instincts are to be very reluctant to get involved in things like this.
That is, and he has said that a number of times. His instinct is to get out of Afghanistan, and the military, the intel community point out the reasons in U.S. interest for staying involved in an area like that. So when we look at the Persian Gulf region, his instinct is not to get embroiled because of all the problems that we've discussed. But in hindsight, the timing is interesting with Bolton. I mean, his departure didn't precipitate this. The United States is not the center of focus. This is an Iran-Saudi Arabia issue.
Mm-hmm.
It really doesn't have anything to do with the U.S. directly. But it is kind of, in a macabre way, sort of funny that the hawk leaves and now we've got this crisis that pops up. But the two aren't related. I think it's just a matter of timing from a historical perspective.
Dakota Wood, he is the Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation. Very good insight, Dakota. Thank you for taking the time today.